Hi everyone, I'm Kim McFarlane, and for our first mini lecture on personality research methods, we're going to be talking about types of data. Specifically, we're going to discuss 4 ways to look at or examine personality: behavior, life, informants, and self, and we're going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each type in turn. So the first way that you can look at personality is simply asking someone to evaluate their own personality. These sorts of judgments or self-reports, what we're calling here S-data, usually come in the form of questionnaires and surveys, a couple of examples of which you've already had some experience with in tutorials and for your assignment. Some questionnaires or surveys ask the respondent to indicate their agreement with the statement about themselves on multi-point Likert scales, such as this 5-point scale ranging from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree, while others have even simpler true-false responses. Questionnaires or surveys aren't restricted to rating scales. Some also have open-ended response options as well. Questionnaires and surveys usually have high face validity. That is, they appear to measure what they're intended to measure. A good example of this is the Interpersonal Reactivity Index that you completed in last week's tutorial. Questions like, I daydream and fantasize with some regularity about things that might happen to me, is an item that, on the face of it, clearly belongs to the fantasy subscale of that instrument. S-data is popular in personality research and assessment for several reasons. First, while others, even your closest friends and relatives, might have seen you in many different situations, the only person who's present with you in all of them is you. You have a unique perspective on your own general nature and are normally your own best expert. Related to this, a second advantage of S-data is that your inner mental life, your thoughts, feelings, and intentions are accessible to you and you alone. Another advantage is that some kinds of S-data are true by definition. That is, if we're assessing what people think about themselves. A good example of this is self-esteem. The only person whose view matters if we're trying to assess your degree of self-worth is your own. What you are willing to attempt in life and the types of goals you set for yourself are also heavily influenced by the view you have of yourself. Self-verification is another phenomenon in which we behave in ways that result in others treating us in a manner that confirms our conceptions of ourselves. S-data can help to capture this. The final advantage of S-data is that it's simple and easy to obtain. All a researcher or psychologist has to do is use an already existing questionnaire or survey that's been designed to assess a particular trait or set of traits, provide a copy of this to the person or people being assessed in a physical or online format, and the researcher will gain a great deal of information at a relatively low cost. However, S-data also has disadvantages, the first of which is related to 2 of its advantages. That is, although we are our own best expert, people can't be forced to provide accurate information about themselves, and so may purposefully conceal or attempt to conceal certain aspects of their own personalities. Some people might feel like they're bragging if they provide accurate information. Some may feel ashamed of aspects of their personality, and yet others will want to make themselves look better than they really are. This happens a lot in job interviews. Another disadvantage is the fish and water effect. Just as a fish presumably doesn't know it's in water, people may not recognize certain characteristics that they have because they've always been that way. For example, someone who's particularly kind or self-sacrificing may not identify themselves as particularly kind or self-sacrificing because it doesn't occur to them to behave otherwise. Freudians would argue that some people might not be able to provide accurate S-data due to active distortions of memories, which they call repression. And another factor that might play a role is a simple lack of self-insight. Narcissists find it difficult to identify themselves as having narcissistic traits, for example. Finally, S-data's greatest strength, that it's simple and easy to obtain, can also be its greatest weakness. Because S-data is so cheap and easy to use, it can be overused. A second way to look at personality is through judgments by knowledgeable informants about general attributes of the individual's personality. This type of report is known as eye data. Although these judgments can be made by informants who do have psychological expertise, such as clinical psychologists, this isn't a requirement. The judgments can be from acquaintances, family members, or co-workers as well. The only requirement is for the informant to be well acquainted with the target's personality. It's only when a judgment needs to be of a technical nature, such as a diagnosis, that psychological expertise is required. In most cases, judgments based on observing the target in whatever context the informant knows them in is all that's required. Eye data is used frequently in our daily life. Letters of recommendation when you apply for a job or to get into grad school is a good example, as they involve the writer of the letter having to provide an opinion about the target's suitability for the role being applied for based on the context that they know the target in. The first advantage of eye data is that it's based on a large amount of information. Someone who's in a position to provide eye data needs to be well acquainted with the target and therefore bases their judgment on having observed the target's behavior in lots of different situations. As there are usually multiple acquaintances, friends, co-workers, and family members who can provide judgments of any given target, eye data can be quite comprehensive, with an average judgment able to be determined based on individual judgments from multiple informants. Another advantage is that eye data is based on observation of behavior in the real world, rather than contrived tests or constructed situations. This means that it's more likely to be relevant to aspects of personality that are relevant to important life outcomes. In addition to this, a third advantage of eye data is that most informants using common sense will consider two contexts when making a judgment of the target. The first type of context is the immediate situation. It will make a difference to whether an acquaintance will consider something anxious behavior if a target is just going about their daily activities, or if a target is about to walk into an auditorium that seats 500 to give an important speech. The second type of context is the target's usual behaviors. Does the target usually seem keyed up and nervous, or is it something that's more unique to a particular situation? Some types of eye data are, like S data, true by definition. That is, if we're assessing sense of humour, this is dependent on the reactions of others, so we would get a better judgment by asking informants rather than a target. Finally, eye data reflects the judgments of the people who interact with the target on a regular basis, and they therefore reflect the target's reputation. As we discussed last week, reputation is important as it affects our opportunities and expectancies, and these can help to determine the person that we become. The first disadvantage of eye data is related to the first advantage of eye data. Specifically, although an informant might have seen the target in a number of different situations, they have still not been around the target 100% of the time, and people can be different in different contexts. Even though your parents would know you very well in the context of the family home, they will likely not know you very well in the context of university. This therefore provides limitations on the behavioral information any one informant can provide. The second disadvantage is that people don't share all of their private thoughts and feelings, so there is necessarily a lack of access to private experience with eye data. Eye data judgments can also be prone to error, with informants more likely to remember behaviors that are extreme, unusual, or emotionally arousing. And they can also be biased due to the informant's personal issues, such as secretly having feelings, either positive or negative, toward the person, or holding prejudices such as racism or sexism that colour their judgments. The third way to look at personality is through life outcomes, known here as L data. L data are verifiable, concrete, real-life facts about a target that may hold psychological significance. They are obtained from archival sources such as police records or medical files, or even questions directly asked to a target about these sorts of verifiable facts. Another form of L data that's becoming more common for use by researchers, given that we're conducting more and more of our lives online, are social media profiles, like those found on Facebook or Twitter. Given that people's social interactions can be assessed through these profiles, they can be used to make judgments about certain personality traits such as extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and even narcissism. One way of thinking about L data is that it is the result of or residue of personality. For example, whether someone holds a police record and what type of record that is going to reflect how that person has interacted with others in the community, and this is related to their personality. Some of the advantages of L data is that archival records are not prone to biases like S and I data. They are objective and verifiable. Another advantage is that L data represent outcomes that have intrinsic importance. They tell us about a target's criminal behavior, their health, their employment status, and so on, and these are either strongly affected by or are informative about psychological variables such as personality. However, this advantage is related to the primary disadvantage of L data, namely that L data have many different causes, so establishing a causal relationship between personality and L data outcomes can be difficult. L data can be influenced by much more than personality, such as genetic illnesses, parental attention, and environmental toxins. Another disadvantage of L data, particularly the use of archival records, is that they can be difficult to access and their use may violate privacy. The final way to look at personality is through the use of B data or behavioral information. B data can be natural, which means that it's based on real-life circumstances, or it can be based on observations made in a laboratory. In both cases, a researcher needs to make careful and systematic recordings of a target's behavior as a result of direct observation. Although it would be ideal to collect natural B data by following a target around night and day, meticulously recording everything they said or did, it wouldn't be feasible nor ethical to do so. Because of this, natural B data is usually collected through diary and experience sampling methods. Diary methods involve participants filling out diaries that details everything they did in a day, ranging from who they interacted with to how many times they performed certain behaviors, and even how they were feeling in various situations. Experience sampling methods are similar. They involve a beeper going off at various times of the day and the target having to record exactly what they were doing at that particular time point. Another related technique is the electronically activated recorder, or EAR. This is a digital recorder that a target carries with them at all times, and it samples whatever sounds are in the target's environment at preset time intervals. For example, it could sample sounds every 30 seconds, or it could sample sounds every 15 minutes. Once the recorder has been returned to the researcher, each recording is coded into a predefined category like on the phone, laughing, watching TV, and so on. Although EARs have their limitations, they clearly demonstrate that we're on the road to the development of computer-assisted methods to assess behavior, thoughts, and feelings, known as ambulatory assessment. Laboratory B data, on the other hand, can be drawn from psychological experiments, which involves a researcher making a situation happen and recording a target's behavior. Or they can be drawn from physiological measures, which record biological behavior such as heart rate, blood pressure, and skin conductance responses. The purpose of this kind of B data is to examine reactions of targets to different situations, and these may be representative of real-life contexts that are difficult to observe directly. Clearly, one of the advantages of natural B data is that it is realistic. It involves observations of what a target is actually doing in their daily life. On the other hand, one of the advantages of laboratory B data is that it can be used to observe behaviors that might be difficult to observe with natural B data if they only occur under very specific circumstances. With laboratory B data, there's no need to wait for the situation of interest to happen, as it can be created in the lab. One of the biggest advantages of B data is that it's based on direct observation on the part of the researcher or psychologist, and therefore has a greater appearance of objectivity with less distortion and bias, and higher reliability and precision. Still, it's worth remembering that subjective judgments still need to be made, as definitions of behavior and interpreting degrees of certain behaviors can be tricky. One of the disadvantages of natural B data is that it can be extremely difficult to get for feasibility and ethical reasons, and that some of the contexts a researcher may wish to observe behavior in may not frequently occur. Similarly, laboratory B data can also be difficult to get for ethical reasons. There are limitations on what researchers can and can't do reasonably with participants, and it can also be quite expensive to run large-scale studies. There's also the issue, as I mentioned before, of uncertain interpretation and behaviors that may not mean what we think that they do. So those are the four main ways that we can look at personality, but it's important to remember that data don't always fit nicely into only one category. Mixtures and combinations of these different types of data are possible. However, the take-home message for you with this mini lecture is that there are a wide range of possible types of data, and each type has its advantages and disadvantages.